couple of years ago, and I learned more about trees that day than I ever knew before. Historically, all I knew about trees was you climbed them or you cleaned up after them. But you're in for a treat because Kasey has a fantastic presentation, and I will turn it over to him now.
All right. Can everyone hear me all right? Do I need a microphone? All right, good deal, because I like to walk around when I talk. I'm going to start off with this slide here. Anybody know where this is at? It's an aerial photo, if anybody doesn't know that. Just take a guess.
The border between America and Mexico?
Border, not too far. Good guess. This is Albuquerque, New Mexico. I like to point this out because what do you notice about this picture? Where do you see your green space at? There isn't a lot, but there is. There's remnants of it. If you look in there, the trees are where the houses are at. Why would anybody go move out to the desert and start trying to plant trees all over the place, right? There's this connection, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, are these connection of trees and our urban environment and what people like and the amenities that these trees provide. You're not going to be able to read this. I'll go over this, but there's a lot of different reasons why trees are important for our community. I tend to break it into three general areas: economic benefits, environmental benefits, and social benefits. And I'll give you guys a couple of examples of these, but from one standpoint, environmental benefits. We all probably understand the importance of clean air and clean water. Those are examples of environmental benefits. Social benefits. The reduction of stress in the community is very important. Economic benefits. Thinking about the realization that landscaping incorporated into a business tends to draw business or people wanting to do business in those particular areas. Those are just some examples. What kind of tree we got here on, I guess it's your guys' left? Dogwood. Everybody knows that tree here in Knoxville. Think about the economic impacts. I'm going to trip over that.
I'm moving it out of your way.
The economic impacts of, let's say, the Dogwood Arts Festival. That image. Trees are an important integrity part of our community. We have historical trees that we all probably can think of. Certain trees in your neighborhood that you can think of that are very important. What about this over here? Anybody know where that's at? 7 Islands. What about our Knoxville urban wilderness? Trees are an integral part of that as well. Green space. Think about the economic impacts that the urban wilderness provides our community. So these are just, again, some examples of the importance of trees in our community. I like this picture as well. Two different communities. One with and one without trees. We've talked about, now we're getting down to the actual households themselves, talking about economic benefits. Heating and cooling costs. Completely different from one house to the other. I like this. You guys take a minute and read that. Imagine if trees gave off Wi-Fi signals. We'd be planting so many trees, we'd probably say you'd plant it too. Too bad they only produce oxygen we breathe. It's something to think about that. The air we breathe, the water we drink. Trees play an important role in that as well. All right. So we're going to kind of fly back in time. When I first got here, it's been about 12 years. And we're going to kind of go through the timeline of where this program's going. So now we know the importance of trees. We're going to go, how are we doing it? How are we getting trees to survive and live in our urban environment? So the early days, here is a ash tree. When I first got here to Knoxville, we were going through a huge devastation of our ash trees. Pretty much most of them have been wiped out here in Knoxville. Emerald ash borer, it's a little green bug that kind of floated through our community, wiped out the majority of our entire ash tree population. So early on, that was one of the things we were dealing with. Looking at this as well. Anybody know what this is? What we call that?
The worst thing you can do to a tree.
Worst thing you can do to a tree. Why is that? what we call volcano mulching. So essentially, that idea of building mulch up and around the tree was put together by, and I know some of you are going to start running out of here to go save your dogwood tree here in a minute. But the idea is for aesthetics. People like that idea of a bunch of mulch piled up and around the tree. Unfortunately, when it does that, it causes the tree to rot around the base. It ends up killing your tree. Over here, what do we call that? Tree topping. So that's another thing we started talking about. These are education things. When I first got here and started my program, we're trying to get out to the community and talk to people the negative impacts of improper mulching, the negative impacts of tree topping. So here's your mulching. There's your rot around the dogwood tree. It's probably one of the biggest killers of dogwood trees is humans. Here's your tree topping. So here's the branch at the top. See these little things right here? Those are your sprouts starting to get bigger and bigger. That's all rotting away right there. So when those limbs get bigger and bigger, they start splitting apart. And that's when they start falling your car, your houses, everything like that. So these are the educational ideas of what we're trying to do to try and encourage proper tree care in our community. Emergency tree calls is another role that we do. A tremendous amount of our time and resources at the city is responding to tree calls. Russ and his 311 department will probably be pretty active tonight and heavy winds coming in. But anytime that sort of thing happens, we are pretty active out there trying to get the roadways essentially cleared so people can continue to use the public spaces as needed. I want to throw this slide in here because these are some of the odd calls I get from time to time. So everybody see that? That's a bicycle on a tree. So every once in a while you get these weird calls. That was one. We got a tree or a bike inside a tree. Can you send somebody out to help us get that? This one here, actually, David Brace called me on this one. He was on his way dropping his kids off at school. Said, he calls me Krouse. Krouse, you got to get down there. There's a car door stuffed in one of your trees. I looked for a police report. The car drove off. Past the side door is wedged into the tree, and the car's gone. So I bring this up because, one, the environmental impacts that we're facing today are tremendous, and that's one of the things. We're trying to be more resilient with what we're trying to do and minimize these type of incidents from happening. I don't know if I'm going to be able to prevent all of this sort of stuff from happening, but we're dealing with these things, so we're trying to balance some of these things as well. So we get a lot of these type of calls, but we're trying to do proactive management as well, as much as we can. One of the proactive things that we're doing, we, in the last 5 years, essentially, we have split, well, our city's always been split into 5 different areas. We have our central, our south, east, west, and north. We decided to do the same thing with our maintenance schedule. So we, each year, go around in all our public trees in each of those districts. We shift from one year to the next, start shifting around, and we prune all the trees and do inspections on all the trees in that geographic area. And then the next year we move to the next place, and so on and so forth. This is an example of proactive management. We know by doing proactive management, we get our trees to survive longer, and we're constantly inspecting them to look for potential defects going back to situations like this that we can look for. Tree planting, I think this is where a lot of folks think we do the most of our time, and it's actually a very small percentage of what we do. We plant trees essentially from, I say Thanksgiving up until next week, about first week of March. We plant anywhere from 500 to 600 trees a year, but this has been a big part. And thinking about where we're going to put those trees in the ground, we're trying to be strategic in those efforts. Thinking about areas where we have low percentages of tree cover. We're strategic in trying to streamline the process. We're looking at the types of trees we're planting, the ones that are going, we don't know with climate change and things that are going to happen, like what the next 50 years are going to hold. What we do know is if we go out there and we plant all the same tree, we're putting all our eggs in one basket. We try and diversify our tree population as much as possible. That way, we set ourselves up for success when it comes to the uncertainties of the climate down the road. This is one of the things that I've taken a lot of pride in. When I started here, we had 1 certified arborist on staff. Today, we have 5 certified arborists. Now, raise a hand. Who has ever heard of a certified arborist? Just out of curiosity. Okay, so about half. This is the credentialing, essentially, that's done by our industry. There are essentially requirements that shows that that individual understands the biology of the trees, the understanding of the maintenance of trees, and making sure that when you are dealing with a certified arborist as opposed to somebody who's just out there doing tree work, that you're getting quality work that is going to be beneficial for you and your tree. So we now have 5 certified arborists on staff at the city of Knoxville. One of the things that we try and push from day one when our employees come into the door is to try and push them. One of the best success stories I have is that we have an individual with pretty much no secondary education whatsoever. And after about 20 years of working at the city of Knoxville, was able to get through and got his certified arborist certificate a couple months ago. And now he runs my crew. So, 2016, I don't exactly know when we started. It seems like a blur. I had my first kid right around this time, so I'm not exactly sure when Trees Knoxville started. But we knew there was a need to try and bridge between the public and the private sector. We at the city can only do so much. We can prune the trees on public property. We can take care of the trees. We can plant trees on public property. But there's this huge need to try and do stuff on private property. There's a huge need to go out there and try and do education to other organizations. And I can't just do it all myself. So we started with the idea behind Trees Knoxville, not just me and several others, to start this not-for-profit organization to try and do just that. Their mission is essentially to try and expand the amount of tree cover in our community. Very simple. More trees, the better. That's their goal. And they do that in a lot of different ways. Some of the things that they do is education programs. They have this volunteer forester program. This is like the first class. We started off with like 15. We just graduated our most recent class. We had over 50 people come in here, and just for one night for 4 weeks, they come in and learn about trees for 3 hours on presentation, sitting inside. It's a long time, but people are committed to it. We teach about pruning, we teach about planting. The idea behind this is not only to try and educate folks about trees, and they can go then back to their neighborhoods and their respective community and teach folks as well, but they also lead some of our volunteer events. We have volunteer tree plantings where they come out and they help us do tree plantings and things like that. They have another program, Canopy for Campus. One of the social benefits that they know about is that children that have access to green space on their school grounds tend to have higher levels of success at school. So that's one of the things that they've been trying to thrive for, is essentially trying to do tree planting at school grounds. They target specific schools. They build a relationship both with the maintenance folks at Knox County schools, but also with the staff and the resources actually on the campus to take care of the trees as well once they're planted. And oftentimes we get the students and the faculty to come out and plant the trees with us. 2020, we jumped into one of the biggest assessments that we've done at the city, which was our urban tree canopy assessment. This was done by Trees Knoxville. A great example of how a non-for-profit helped leverage resources for the actual city. Essentially what they did is mapped out all the trees across the entire city. If you can see this here, that tree canopy, we are at about 38% tree cover in the city of Knoxville. So everywhere, if you're standing inside the city limits, you have a 38% chance that you're standing underneath a tree. Essentially is what that says. We have about 32% of hard surfaces. and essentially 28% of other green space, thinking about people's lawns, agricultural fields, things like that. Why is that important? Well, now we have a baseline of where we can work for to try and move the needle. We can monitor where our losses are or what our gains are. So here is the city kind of broken apart into neighborhoods. You're not going to be able to see this, but if you see the colors, the darker the green essentially is more tree cover, and the darker the brown is less tree cover. You might expect this. As you move out to the outskirts of the city, you see areas of higher percentages of tree cover. Some of those neighborhoods, like in South Knoxville, we have over 50% tree cover in some of those areas. As you move downtown, we have about, essentially where we're standing today is about 10% tree cover, which is our lowest percentage in the entire community, and so on and so forth. A lot of people ask, well, how's Knoxville compared to other cities? That kind of gives you some geographic area. We are sitting around 38%, like I said. If you compare that to like Chattanooga, they're sitting about 45%. Take that with a grain of salt. There's a lot of different, think about like Nashville, they're a metro government, so their entire county counts for that. They have a lot of rural areas, a lot of forested areas. So but people like that as comparisons. And we like to try and beat Chattanooga in anything we can anyways, right? We also looked at changes. So these are the neighborhoods and the areas of the city where we're actually seeing tree gains and tree losses. The darker brown is where we're seeing tree losses. The darker green is where we're seeing tree gains happening. And so really what we have now is a model to start being strategic about where we want to put our emphasis and our efforts. So for example, if we float back here, if you go down to South Knoxville, high percentage of tree cover, some areas where they're seeing some tree losses, that might be areas where we're trying to look at ways to try and incorporate tree preservation measures. Whereas, let's say, a neighborhood in East Knoxville here, relatively low percentage of tree cover, it's staying the same. Maybe those are areas where we start targeting tree planting efforts. So we can start using models like this from this canopy assessment to start strategizing about where we're going to put our resources from our tree efforts. How am I doing on time? Good. All right.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, kid.
All right. A lot going on here. I'm going to work you through this. Each one of these dots represents a census area inside our community. This down here is the percentage of tree cover, and this was a study that was done by UT looking at temperatures on the hottest day of the year. So what they were able to look at with this canopy study and comparing to that study is where you saw higher percentages of tree cover, the temperature in the morning was much lower. And same thing when you get into the evenings as well. Now people will look at this. What is that difference on that? So 70 degrees and all the way up to, let's say, 68 degrees all the way up to 74 degrees. So there's a 6-degree temperature change in the same areas where essentially high levels of tree cover as opposed to low levels of tree cover. Some of you are saying, what's the big deal, right? 6 degrees. I guarantee you, if I want to change that thermostat in this room 6 degrees one way or the other, some people would get pretty uncomfortable in here, right? So my take-home message on that is 2 things. One, thinking about the people that live in those neighborhoods. There's heat levels. That's stress, right? They have to live in a community where temperatures are higher, in certain areas where there's lower percentage tree cover. There's a second part of that. They have to pay for energy bills based on those temperature levels. And when you're talking about 6 degrees over a long period of time, an entire summer, it starts to add up. All right, jumping ahead now. We just embarked on one of our biggest projects in the last year. We did our urban forest master plan. This was a partnership between Trees Knoxville, City of Knoxville, Keep Knoxville Beautiful, the state of Tennessee, UT, and I'm missing somebody, KUB. So several partners got together, and essentially we wanted to build a map and a plan for where we're gonna go for the next 30 years, essentially with trees. What are we gonna do with trees in our community? I will say the plan is released. It just came off the press last week. If anybody's interested, it's knoxvilletreeplan.org. But I'm going to go over some of the things that we did during this process. Oh, there we go. There's all our partners that were helped fund this project. We had over 80 different organizations, and some of you in this room may have participated, or your organization may have participated, and essentially looking at our discovery process, trying to look and grab as much information from folks as possible. So our discovery process, we had lots of public house meetings, we had advisory group and workshops, we had one-on-one interviews. We did one of the most important things because we wanted to get information from everybody. We took what we call take the show on the road. We went to neighborhoods. If they requested us, we would go to their neighborhood, talk to them about trees, and then listen to them and seek input on what their concerns were. Through this process, when we were all wrapped up, we came up with 3 simple goals. Very simple. We want to see more trees. We want to see better quality of green space and trees. I'll go back to that here in just a minute. And we want to make sure it's equitable throughout all of our community. Now, more trees is pretty simple, right? We've already talked about it. More trees, essentially all those amenities I talked about, the social, economic benefits, all those things. We know that the more trees you have, the more amenities you get. That's why we want more. Specifically, the goal is to try and get to 40% by 2040. So we're trying to raise 2% tree cover by that 2040. That's what the plan came up with. Better quality. We talked about species and diversifying our trees. Anybody know what this is? Kudzu, right? Does that mean we want 40% tree kudzu in the city of Knoxville? No. We need to make sure that when we're not just measuring by quantity, we're measuring it by quality as well. And making sure that we have not just a bunch of invasive species like kudzu and privet and honeysuckle out there, but we have a lot of native trees that are going to survive longevity, things like that. And equitable, that was one thing we heard a lot from a lot of the folks throughout the community is making sure that just because of where you live doesn't make a determination on the amount of amenities you get from tree canopy. Everybody should have access to green space and trees, and that's one of the things we're going to be shooting for in the next couple of years. We're not going to go over there. We came up with 9 specific strategies on this. If you want to read more about this, you're going to have to get into the plans. I don't have time today to dive into them, but thinking about more about collaborative efforts. We need more collaboration in our community. More outreach and education impacts. That's the number one thing. We heard a lot about things about development and other things like that. But number one thing we heard from was what are we going to do? We need to educate people about this. That's the number one thing that folks wanted to see more than anything is more education opportunity out there. So on and so forth. We talked about managing invasive species, identifying and prioritizing our planning efforts. So each of these strategies had about 9 or 10 different actual action steps that are associated with each one of them. So, anybody know what this is? Marathon. All right, there you go. Right, everybody. Some people don't like the people that have these on their car. Some people love having this on their car, right? But we all identified this 26.2, right? That's a marathon. So just to kind of get the wheels turning, the ideas going, I like to share this idea, this 440-400 idea, something that we've kind of tossed around this idea of. So maybe we have bumper stickers on this. We all stick it on the back of our car or on our business or whatever that means, wherever we want to put it. But talking about more livable green Knoxville, maybe 4 native shade trees from every window. So that means every window you look out in our community, you have a vision of 4 native trees. We have 40% tree cover by 2040, and we're striving to try and get 400 of walkable miles with shade. Now, this is kind of going back to those 3 goals we have. Does it capture all 3 of those things? More trees? Equitable? Quality? Thinking about native trees? There you go. So this is a big part of, I like this example because it shows that the plan isn't just about go out there and plant our way out of there. We've got to market the idea, we got to get folks behind it, and we got to get this thing running. And this is just kind of an idea that's been kind of churning in some of our thought processes, is making it more marketable and making sure our outreach connects with more people. With that said, I've got my email address there, the website to the plan for folks who are having a hard time to sleep tonight, who need something to read. And with that, I'm just going to open up to questions.
Yeah, you got a couple of questions.
Couple questions? Okay, couple. Yeah.
Can you give us your pros and cons of Bradford pears?
Well, okay, good example. So cons, they fall apart, they're invasive, they smell awful, although I don't really mind the smell. A lot of people don't like the smell. The pros. Anybody have any pros to them? They are trees, right?
Shade.
Shade, they provide better air quality, right? They grow fast, so they plant. You get your amenities really quick from them.
They're cheap.
They're cheap. So,
Well, in our situation, the former homeowner that does support wires.
Yeah.
So I know Bradford pears break easy. When it gets windy, well, those have kept these the support wires have kept the Bradford pears intact. Now I've got 2 or 3 that are 35, 40 feet tall, and they're just gigantic.
they're definitely a nuisance, but my point is we got to balance that sort of thing. Even though some of these invasive species are a nuisance, we can't just go in there and cut them all down and not replace them, right? So we got to think about the next steps. Bradford pear, I mean, when it comes down to it, I'm not going to go out of my way to save a Bradford pear. Although, has anyone been to the 9/11 memorial in New York City?
Yes.
Anyone seen the small tree that's all cabled together? The one that survived the rubble? That's Bradford pear. They've got about 20, 30 cables connecting this tree, keeping it together. But it's got some symbolic, obviously, importance to it. So probably the most notable Bradford pear out there. Another question? Yeah.
One, I think our Rotor Act funded a project review when you first moved to Knoxville in 2012 at West YMCA. So I want to catch up with you and see if that was with you. But 2, all the developments we have, like new single-family homes in Knoxville and everything, like big neighborhoods, are you doing any partnership with them to help plan around replacing the trees that they're taking out, or like requiring that they put in a certain number of trees or anything like that?
Our code does require certain replacement as far as trees go. And working with those type of projects, going back to what I was saying about education, that is probably the most important thing is we know, well, 2 things. We know that there's a lot of folks out there that want trees, right? We know that homes and neighborhoods that have trees are going to be more marketable for resale and for folks wanting to move in there. We also know we need houses, right? So that's the other aspect of it. My second point is, going back to my very first slide, we do know in a lot of residential areas, even after some of these things happen, we do know that oftentimes these areas do get replanted just by the property owner, just by oftentimes doing nothing. Now, does that mean we shouldn't have just let everything be without any sort of effort to try and preserve trees? No, but trying to look at incentives. And that's one of the big things we looked at through this is, are there incentives that we could possibly do to try and make those things mesh? And then also help educate the folks who are not only doing the projects, that are going to be investing in the projects as well. So,
What can you do to control
Goats.
Goats. Goats are not the best because they like to eat it and then it all just sprouts right back. But yeah, it's a good PR thing. But we have been very successful doing chemical applications in some areas. But the best thing you can possibly do is just change the programming altogether. So we have seen that a good example is the old Baptist Hospital, where that was across, that whole hillside there was completely kudzu. We changed the programming there. We had to do some chemical applications to try and cut it back. I would suggest if you got a heavy population of it, is to get a company or an individual in there that does invasive species eradication and let them draw up a long-term plan, not just go in there and try and spray it and walk away from it, because it's an ongoing process. Something we're doing right now, trying to hammer back at what we see at Fort Dickerson and some of these other areas across the city. So, good question. It's not easy.
Last one.
Will you talk about with me?
Yeah.
Will you talk about the tree canopy grant?
Thank you for bringing that up. So the city, Trees Knoxville just got a $1.7 million grant from the federal government, the Inflation Reduction Act. Essentially, you go out there and plant and maintain trees both on public and private property, doing it lots of different ways. And then the University of Tennessee also got like a $2.6 million grant through the same process, but also to plant trees, but from a stormwater application. So right now, that is $4-point-something million of investment for trying to re-canopy some of the parks, and it's all being invested essentially in underserved areas. That was one of the stipulations on the grant, was that it's all 100% funded if it goes into an underserved neighborhood. That was essentially denoted by the federal government. So, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for